I'm really delighted that I'm joined today by Nick Craig. Nick is the president of the Authentic Leadership Institute. He's also a Wharton Fellow and the author of the recent Harvard Business Review article, From Purpose to Impact. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Tanvi.
I am so excited to talk to you about authentic leadership and purpose for leaders. This is a conversation that is going around in corporate circles and in our classroom and executive education. And I was hoping you could begin by defining for us, what do we really mean when we start talking about authentic leadership? And why has this become such an important conversation today?
Well, in some sense, it's almost more important to talk about inauthentic leadership. In some ways, if we look at the Lance Armstrong or Rupert Murdochs, we can look at them and obviously see the fact that there's something missing. The history of authentic leadership comes out of the turn of the 21st century, where we saw all of these great exemplar leaders fall from grace. And then in 2007, 2008, we saw the next gen fall from grace as well, where we put them on these pedestals, and in reality, they had these incredible flaws. Authentic leadership is really about being true to oneself and really following one's deeper sense of purpose and clarity, but doing it from a perspective of high values, high ethics. And in some ways, it's how do you create authentic results? How do you create authentic impact in the world? Now, when we look at the Gandhis and the Mandelas and others, we see them because they stood up against a system that was inauthentic. And in some ways, for most of us, especially in our organizations, we're faced on a day-to-day basis with a level of inauthenticity. And the question becomes is, do we buy into it? Or do we find some way to hold on to our light and be able to help change that? In some sense, that tension is what we're working on and where authentic leadership shows up. You don't have to be really an authentic leader if everybody else is going in the same direction. Okay, so if you want to know when you're being most authentic, it's usually when you're finding yourself being in front of the crowd, moving in a direction. And then you have to decide, is this truly your calling to move in that way, or not? In some sense, that moment is where we find ourselves having to be the most authentic.
Yeah, I remember the issue being raised on, can an inauthentic leader even be called a leader? Because in some senses, you're not helping change anything, you're not helping pave the way, but you are kind of reinforcing the inauthenticity that might be around you. So that's something to think about. But for those of us who are wanting to embrace the authentic leadership journey, what's a good place to begin? How does one take that first step?
Well, I think the beautiful thing is that the answer for each of us tends to be in really looking and taking some time to step back and look at the journey we've been on in our life. Looking at how we were brought up, the challenges we faced, how we faced those. What's our version of resilience when certain things happened in our lives? Looking at both the good times and the bad, and looking at what's the part of us that always shows up. In the United States, we had a great president during our Civil War called Lincoln, and he had a wonderful quote that says, you know, in a time of crisis, most people can be trusted. It's when you give them power that you find out what they're really made out of.
That's true.
And I think for all of us, if we look back in our life, the thread of who we are, that is that resilience, that deeper part of us that stands independent of which way the winds are going, has shown up many times. But we're so focused on going to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, we don't take the time back to step back and go, wait a minute, I'm much more resilient than I thought. When we do the programs and we have people tell their most challenging life stories, and I then at the end say, now look at your current challenges and how big are they compared to before you told the stories? And people say, always. They're so much smaller.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed. The only thing that's changed is that they realize how bigger they are. Right. Authentic leadership is really about having us really discover how big each of us truly is and what are we going to do with this beautiful instrument that we are.